Hello there, my name's Johnny Vedmore. Welcome to the Fungi Monkey Podcast. This is episode 1, and this is a really important episode because this podcast is going to be looking at culture, society, our place in culture, relevant to every other factor that we have in our lives. Remember, each one of us is kind of the center of our own universes, and we all have our own experiences. And yes, that may sound cliche, but when you actually play out those experiences, they all make a whole, they all make a society, they all make a group of people who have to work together, and this podcast is going to explore that, and I've got a very special guest in for the first podcast. So Pali, please introduce yourself.
Hello Johnny, it's so good to be here. I'm Pali, also known as Jaspal Naveel Singh, also known as Navarius, also known as Pali G.
Yeah, I like it.
And I've got loads of other nicknames. And yeah, I'm just a human being on this planet, excited about the life on this planet. I'm very much a person who is centered on the here and now. So the culture, the society, the history, rather than the eternal, spiritual, everlasting, universal. However, I see also how important that dimension is. So I'm really excited to explore with you today, the difference between what we call culture and our everyday behaviors and our experiences that are very unique to our lives, and how these connect with these bigger ideas of God, the soul, universe, language, something like that, right?
Yeah. That's really good, because I like what you say about the idea that we're. I heard something recently. There's a wonderful comedian, you may have heard of him, called Dave Chappelle. Everybody knows a bit of Dave Chappelle, but he gives a little stand-up piece about his experience with a transgender lady that he knew that he had front up one of his shows one time as a support act, and later on, after the support act bit, and Dave Chappelle was on, this woman had bombed. But when she was in the crowd and people started taking the piss out of this woman in different ways through the show, she became part of the show in a different way, and intricately performed this sort of a comedy that was high above anything they could attain normally, but also ended in one thing, which is Dave Chappelle said that he didn't agree with it all, etc. At the end of the day, he doesn't agree about the gender. In some way, he said this, and she said to him that she was having a human experience. How dare he? Because she's having a human experience and she's just trying to get through it. And that is one of the most touching 2 words that I've heard in the past few years. The past few years for a lot of people have been a real dark place. I've seen real sadness around, and I know we don't necessarily want to go and talk into the specifics right now of that, because this isn't about that, but I've seen people who are on the edge of crisis all around, and what you're seeing is people having human experiences. So it was very obvious to me when I was standing in the center of town the other day. I told you that I recently come off Prozac, fluoxetine, which is quite a heavy drug, and while I was on it, whenever I was in a busy place, everybody, all of it, they all seemed like a homogenous group of people who were all had the same knowledge, all had the same expectations. They were all, it was all me against this group think that was all around, and they were all the same, and they all had the same, and it drives you crazy. And since coming off those things, I can stand in a busy place and I look around and realize each one of these people that make up this homogenous group is panicked, scared, they have fear in their eyes. They're all trying to work out, they all know deep down that they don't know the majority of things, and they would love to, but they're too scared to look stupid. Their egos are in the way, all sorts of different things that leaves these people really lonely people. And suddenly it's changed. My perception of society has changed very much over the past few years, with all the experiences that we've had, from being something that was one group of people that were all in on it, to being something which is a much more I say it's sad. There's elements of like I think we've allowed ourselves in a sense to become, it's really hard to say this word, but pathetic to an extent in the way we act sometimes and the way we treat people. It's not too rude to say that, because we see it all the time. You watch anything online, and to study this and to study the understanding of having that human experience and understanding that each of these people are having that human experience is really, really important to me. Let's find out a little bit about you, because honestly, you are more than just a little bit interesting. Where are you from originally?
Well, let's postpone this question for a moment.
Oh, I love it.
Okay, because that's a very, very interesting, loaded question for me personally in my own individual experiences. But let me just pick up on something that you have said about, I think you used the word majority at one point in your discourse right there. And you said something like, there's all these individual experiences, but people are not sort of aware, or they're almost ashamed of their own experiences because they think their experience isn't significant in the grand scheme of things. And at that point, and when we think about the grand scheme of things, we quantify, right? It is a matter of quantification. So knowing the majority of something, knowing the majority of people, right, is something with which we legitimize knowledge of our experiences and relevance of our experiences. So the individual, everyday Joe, I think they call it in this country, is sort of almost anxious about the grand scheme of things, because they know they don't know anything, right? Their own experiences don't matter. There's something more majority. I need to know what all the people think in order to sort of understand society, right? And that is a very sort of, I think, Western, individualistic, rationalistic almost, scientific way of understanding the world and your relationship to the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it is based on study. What I do as a profession, I'm a researcher, and all I learn in the universities and in the sort of humanities and the social sciences and linguistics is a quantification discourse. It is about knowing more, knowing all the variables. Your study needs to be representative, right? You need to have X amount of participants. You need to have a particular significance level in your statistical tests. If it is above that, it's not relevant, right? And there's something. There's a wonderful scholar called Sally Mary Eagle, and she writes about the seductions of quantification. A wonderful piece. I can really recommend that to check it out. The Seductions of Quantification. And in this book, she really makes us understand that we live in a regime, right, in a sort of governance of quantification, where everything needs to be quantified. Statistics, GDP, deaths in COVID, infection, incidence rates, right? We live in a world of quantification.
Like we're collecting data.
Recollecting data. And the individual now, even more than maybe 200 years ago, will recognize, oh, I don't know anything. Mm-hmm. Because there are all these numbers floating around, and I have only a high school degree, if at all. Right?
It's been proven, of course, that the people who think they know the most are usually the ones who score most average in the test as well, as shown in the Dunning-Kruger. So there's lots of like crossovers with the way. So
we need to find an alternative to this system of quantification, and which starts with the human experience, the individual, unique, particular human experience. And that's it. We don't quantify and generalize into something bigger. We just say, that is reality. That is full reality right there in the experience, emotional experience of this everyday Joe on the street. each one of us has the full universe and the full experience of the world and the entire knowledge within them. And that is another, I think, sort of way of looking at the relationship between the self and the other, and society and culture, and all the exciting things that you are exploring in this podcast.
There's so many. There's so many things to look into there. But the idea that we're entering into a world where everything needs to be, or they feel, the powers that be feel that everything needs to be quantified. Is there any way to stop that if that quantification becomes AI driven, quantum enabled AI driven, and goes to a point that I think if that would happen, surely we would see a point where we have to separate from those numbers because it's a form of money ball that only the top people in society can understand, and that the normal people will just literally switch off to the idea that there's all that so many. So we have to come to an emotional and spiritual sort of basis on at the end of it, a conclusion.
I mean, I think what you are saying is or what you're suggesting, is there an alternative? No, there is no alternative, I think. Why? Because of course quantification and science is not just an innocent development that happened by chance in Western society. It is tightly close to capitalism and the idea of money. Right? And I think so money, in order to make anything valuable in our capitalistic societies, we have to put a number on it in terms of US dollars or whatever it is, right? And that in itself is a quantitative assigning of value,
have to turn things into
right? So
commodities.
if something is $500, it has to be worth more than something that is $200. So and in order to justify giving someone $500, we need to see the variables. Has this business, this person sort of, or this, in my case, this researcher, considered all the studies, has a big sample size, has a big understanding, a general understanding? Can the hypothesis be generalized? And that is quantified as well. So we have a direct relationship between the quantification and science and academia, as well as the quantification in terms of capitalistic finance sectors and so on, the banking and the states that basically are just managers for the banks nowadays.
Your experience of being within, looking for grants, looking for some form of funding for studies that you feel are important within culture and about society. Do you find that you'll only find it from people who are, I mean, this is an obvious, maybe a loaded question in itself, but do you find that a lot of the donors are ideologically driven, that if you don't support what they say, you're not going to get anything anyway?
I wouldn't say that they actually really engage with the arguments of our research. The interesting thing about funding is that it is not so much the case that we academics apply for some amount of funding that helps us to do the best research we can do, and then the research counts. It is more that the amount of funding already counts. So someone's got a grant for, let's say, £10,000 and does an amazing piece of research with it, engaging the communities, having social impact, advancing the knowledge. And some professor, let's say, from a big university, applies for like a £5 million funding, gets it, and does not a very robust piece of research. That research will count more because it has more money in it. So it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You see, it is not what someone does. And the most ingenious pieces of research, pieces of music, pieces of art are actually low budget versions, because there's this limitation of your possibilities that makes you ingenious, that makes you brilliant, that makes you think. Rather, if you have all the resources that you want, you become a bit lazy. You're not hungry to look for innovation.
And a lot of the times, if you want, when things go against that grain, it tends to be because there's a load of different individuals who are all working together with that same somehow motivation to succeed.
Right.
So how does one become a professor and become to think like this then? Because I'm going to get back to the loaded question, because I'm really interested by the fact of how loaded this simple question is, because I've had loads of experience. I've worked in hotels for 20 years of my life over different periods. I've travelled around the place. I've met loads of people. I grew up in a society that would be in a different campsite in the UK, somewhere dotted around the UK every week, with 8,000 people from all around the UK. I never had that understanding of why it was. I was always proud to say, oh, I'm from Cardiff, etc. I never knew there was anything loaded, but that's partially because I'm a white male living in this reality where other people have a different view. Now, my experience has been, especially over the past few years, I found myself actually using that question as a first question to find out the honesty of someone, or necessarily what they, how if they're willing, if they're looking for conflict, or if they're willing to talk. Because I find that when you say, where are you from, to someone, the amount of emotional response that comes with that is often so it must be tainted by the propaganda in society, from of course being foreign and all of that, which seems outdated of course to most of us, but to a lot of people it's their real lived experience that they are seen as less because they come from another place, or they're from another genetics, or from another family. And even in this country, I mean, we're not just talking black or white. I mean, at one point being Welsh or English or Scottish was a big different thing. Your higher order was the English born, this nobility, and we were these scruffy troublemakers that lived over on the side, just like in Germany, where you have the barbarians, the history of the barbarians and stuff, where we say barbarians, but you could go into each of the tribes and find they each had individual cultures and their individual stories and etc. So it's always other. It's always seeing it from the other. So people are often, I'm always amazed by how quickly you're able to tell someone's personality, often from the answer they give to the question, where are you from?
Right.
So I do agree it's a completely loaded question. And I often want to ask it in the most the least controversial way. I want to ask it with the most honesty, because I love learning about people, where they're from, the places they're from. I don't see it's all very like Occidental. You don't get a choice of where you're born. You're just born there, and it is your home, and you do feel a lot of the time that you don't have any control over this stuff. So no one can be held accountable for where they're from, who they are, who their fathers were. That's ridiculous. So I find that on a base level, I just don't understand it. Maybe it's something that's missing in my psychology, but I've always seen it as it's something that should be treated like a joke, but obviously goes to points that isn't a joke. So how do you feel when you get asked that question?
I feel very different depending on who asks the question and what situation it is in. It has to do with racialization, with marginalization, with being asked that question in your hometown, where there's really nothing that would, in terms of my language or in my sort of social capital, that would trigger that question, right? But it is my race, right? My racialization, the color of my skin, the color of my eyes.
It's a beautiful color.
Cheers, thank you. I love my color.
Oh my God, you should see him.
Facial, like what my race, right? I wouldn't say my race because I don't believe in race, but it is the racialization of me, right? In a particular socio-historical context. 9/11 happened in 2001, right? I was just growing a beard. I was 20 years old. I was what Jaspal calls the terrorist look-alike body, right? I got stopped by the police every week.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Every time I go to the airport, I was scrutinized, I was checked, right? There was a fear, and all of a sudden I was a Muslim.
Yeah.
Before that, I was never a Muslim. Right? so it is 9/11 and the beard and the racialization of Muslims in this particular moment that created my body in the from the perspective of the police and other authorities as a potential threat, someone to be scrutinized, someone to ask, why are you here and why do you motherfucker have a German passport, right? So there was this exclusion, right, all of a sudden. So whenever someone asks me that question, I don't know which side they are from, right? I don't know if they're a blatant racist.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're an ignorant person who's by nature of their ignorance sort of doing racist things or saying racist things. Or I don't know if it is a traveler or someone who is interested in different cultures, or if it is just small talk, which is insignificant small talk. What do you do, where you're from, right? So I don't know what the intention of the question is, and I get it asked so many times.
I'm so glad you're speaking about this, because honestly, this is one of the most interesting pieces of. I think most people miss out on how important this is.
Right. So it is that idea of not belonging anywhere, right? And then, of course, now the culturally interested person. I tell you a little narrative, if I may. First time I fell in love with someone, and you might hear this now. So I was like 15 years old. I fell in love with Helen, right? Helen was a year older than me. She was in the class above me. She's beautiful. I felt love or like romantic, erotic feelings for the first time in my life in puberty. And there one day, I was never dared to speak to her or anything, right? And I only saw her on the bus and stuff. She was a year above me. And there, one afternoon I was there, I came onto the bus, and the bus was packed, and I was just stood there, and she was right in front of me. There she stood, the beautiful curly hair, and she said, "Hi, I'm Helen." I said, "Hi, I'm Pali," and she said, "Where are you from?" And I was like a bit I was like a bit shocked, like she's actually speaking to me, right? So at that point in my life, this question wasn't really loaded for me, right?
Yeah.
And and I was like struggling to find my words, and and she said, "Are you Persian?" And I said, "No, I'm Indian." And she said, "Oh wow, that's even more interesting." So I went down to my mother's house, and she had all these books, History of India, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. I went to read up on that stuff. I was like, damn, I'm Indian, right? So I need to know stuff about India. I need to know stuff. I need to quantify my knowledge to understand the full picture, right? Because all of a sudden I'm Indian, and that's really interesting to the person I feel an affection to, right? And that was a really interesting moment in my life where I sort of self-orientalized, right? Self sort of became an Indian, right? Started knowing stuff about India, right? Which was, so it became conscious to me in some ways, right? So that was quite an interesting moment which was related to my heterosexual desires, which was related to my puberty, to my inexperience of flirting, to everything, right? Yeah. But now, interestingly, I have a story about this, right? I can say, my father is this and that, and he comes from there and there, and this and that. But that was only because sort of Helen put me on that that trajectory, and I started exploring that side of my identity, right? But a lot of people who are second generation, third generation migrants, they're not interested in that stuff. And that question, where are you from, pushes them to become brown, to become other, to become something else, not just the average Joe down from Cardiff, but someone who has a history somewhere else in the world. And for many people, for me, I made that into my profession. And I sort of embraced it, and I love playing around with it. But for many people, they're not really interested in it. They just want to be down here and hanging out and doing their job. They want to be like everybody else. And that question, others, someone,
are you
right?
Other?
Are you other?
Where are you from is are you
and
other?
If that is a good intention, a cultural curiosity, or if it is a racist or ignorant stigmatization, that is often not clear, right? And it's hard for racialized people to sort of navigate this and think around these problems and deal with the emotions that come out. And I have spent a lot of time trying to articulate my response to that question.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, I think, they can't really. Oh, they're not. I mean, they can, but again, coming back to that first point, they are not confident in recognizing that their individual experience is important.
Yes.
Right? Is something relevant to that earlier point that we talked about science and quantification. Anyway,
when we're talking about young puppy love, I should intercede for a second and say, if you can hear some huffing, some puffing, some weird sounds, some scrambling around, it's because I do have a puppy here, a little chalky puppy called Bella Chow. She is refusing to be tired all day, however many walks I give her. She is after affection, and so this is a podcast where there's going to be a puppy around. I'm sorry, people. If you don't like it, well, go off to non-puppy world, because we're in puppy world, and she is assaulting us as she goes. So she might disappear into the naughty hole if she's not careful. It's so hard as a white person to dare talk about race.
No, it's not.
You know, the feeling of wanting to talk about. So when I ask this,
you need to.
Yeah, I know. Because you know what? There's a lot of when I listen to a lot of the debates on TV programs and the professional podcasters or etc. They all say the same thing. They say we need to have a conversation about this. But I've been hearing them say we need to have a conversation about it for all my life. So this is like 4 decades of listening to them saying, okay, we need to have a conversation, and no conversation happening, because quite simply they're scared of some form of I mean, you can't even use, because you want to use terms like lynching, like some modern day lynching, but then instantly it's like the connotations to the racial problems of the past. I mean, everything you possibly say as a white person in these realms can be very scary, because we come as like as a kind of like or a lot of white people feel like they come as a homogenous sort of like lump. They're all treated the same, away from individuality because of the people of the past. But then a lot of white people, when you actually delve into it, a lot of people I've met, they think they're not racist, and then you actually test it out and you work out that there's very certain things within their personality that mean they do not have friends from other cultures, other races, because they get scared. And a lot of that fear, I think, comes from not having the real conversations. So what are the real conversations to be had?
The real conversations are the material distributions, right? The distribution of material and cultural wealth, right? And the ghettoization, the segregation in the material world, which also extends, of course, into algorithms and sort of contemporary forms of cultural conviviality that happens online and so on, right? So they are sort of these material inequalities are also mirrored in the online, right? But I think I think we need to change this. My point here is we can have discussions about something, and some talk shows and some films and some documentaries and so on, right? And I think this is happening at the moment in the UK, around the world, after George Floyd, with the rise of Black Lives Matter, the re-emergence of it. That has changed a lot. Every ad you see on TV has a black person in it. That has to now it's sort of like, if you don't have a black person in your marketing campaign, you're racist, right? And to some degree, I support this. It's great. Put that black person in there. It's just I know we talked a lot about token black people, token migrants, or like women being tokenistically put onto the forefront or something. But I think that representation has its value, right? We need quantitative circulation of images that will change the discourse as well. And that has partly to do with material distribution, right? We need actually more black people in governance, in media, in just like more black faces, literally.
Do you think that will, though, obviously have some form of backlash from less progressive white corners? Like there will be some form of like, you know, when we've seen, and I'm not saying it's I'm not arguing against it because I'm quite into it. Like I find that when you walk around nowadays, if you look at adverts, if I'm quite honest, that you see that straight away. But if you're living in an like all white town in an all white place, and all the adverts are people who are from other countries, it is going to be really hard, and it does seem like for those people very quick. And those people, I think, are the people who are most likely to be left behind. They're the least likely to enter into the discourse by choice.
Right.
They've already got segregated. I mean, if you go to a place, if you go up north of Manchester, what you've got is places which are divided down the centre, white over here, and Asian and black communities over here. You know,
but the white, disenfranchised white working class, I guess that is sort of what you're trying to describe here, is they need to have their own class struggle, right? So that
I'm with you.
And I think that class struggle and race struggle, right, or racialization struggle, these need to go hand in hand. We mustn't, the major device of empire and of the state is to divide and rule, right? That is the tactics since the Romans. We need what they do is they divide. The easiest division you can do is female, male, black, white, poor, rich, right? So these like three, probably ability also plays into there, right? The able-bodied and the unhealthy, right? In the pandemic, that plays a new has a new significance. But so dividing, and now we are pointing the fingers at each other. And the most racist, quote unquote, places are those of poor white working class neighborhoods. And that is so sad to see, that solidarity between, let's say, the white working class, women, homosexuals, queer people, black people, racialized people, poor people, that solidarity isn't really there, right? And
I do
pointing
believe,
fingers at each other.
Now, I've done a lot of research into the history of communities in the Midlands and the North. If you were to see what is described as a genetic map of the UK, which recently they looked at the grandparents, and they took gene samples of grandparents of loads of people from all around the UK, and they sampled them to see where they were originally from, and etc., where their descendancy were from. We're not as complicated as you think. In the UK, if you look at the exact genetic map and you put it over a map of 500 AD, it's the exact same tribes are in the exact same places. So the Normans and those are down in the southeast, all around London. They're still from the same tribes. There's 5 tribes in Wales. There's South Wales, there's South Pembroke, North Pembroke, there's North Walians, and there's the Marshall Lords or the Marshall people, who later, I mean, all of these different things. All up north, then you have loads of different tribes, loads of different settlements. It was completely and utterly raided over and over again by Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, taken all through history. After all of that time, when you're talking through the Tudor times and these times, there were Tudor times, through Tudor times there were sacking rebellions up in the north, because they were always different people from the people who were holding the wealth of this country. They were always seen as other by the other people, and those people were all white. They're all white, and they do it. I think there's such a natural instinct to know, and this has been proven in experiments, to know another tribe in battle. I know there was a guy who did experiments where basically he looked at all of these different people. They took genetic samples from all these different people in this tribe that were all having this big fight, and they discovered the people who matched up automatically with no seeming, like they weren't from the same tribe and stuff, the people who defended each other had the same genetics. They automatically, like they instinctually knew to side with their own tribe, like side with their own genetics and genealogical structure, and that exists within in this sort of white society that we've had in Britain. Is now,
is it a sense, I'm struggling to understand fully, is it a sense of purity? racial purity or tribal purity.
When we had all the different wars, and after the colonies, after the Victorian times, what happened was a lot of the people got shipped. A lot of the people who came to Britain got shipped up north. So if any migrants came in and they wanted to start a new life, and still to this day, you look at the statistics, it's the same. The majority of them will get shipped up north. And it's like these people down here in the southeast of the country, who all happen to be from the same Norman descendants, all have the money and the wealth and the power, and they all choose to divide and conquer who they see as others. And where we see it's so simple within a visual spectrum, he's black, he's Asian, he's white, and we do that. There's so much more at play, I think, here.
I think there's it's really interesting what you say, and I think there's some, when you talk about genetics, right, then there's a sense of natural science, of reality, objective reality or something. But what genetics actually tells us, if you go 500 years, 1500 years, 2000 years back, it is, okay, this particular tribe you were talking about, 2000 years ago, 500 years ago, had that same culture. But what happened 15,000 years ago, you don't know. So we know, of course, that the British Isles were among the last to be settled by, human beings, right? In Europe, compared to Europe, like Eastern Europe and Southern Europe was settled
way earlier. A lot of the early tribes in Britain were Slavic tribes.
So the people came in here. They come from somewhere. Even those indigenous British tribes come from somewhere, right? And they came together at a particular moment in history, came here, conquered something, settled somewhere, and we can look back to a certain amount of time and say, okay, these people are still those people. But it doesn't really say anything about the racial, physiological, biological reality of race or tribe or ethnicity. It only allows us to go back in history, maybe 500 years, 1500 years, or I don't know how long these studies, sort of in terms of apparent, what's the technical word here? Apparent diachronically apparent or something that way, right? It is something which appears to us as being through time diachronic. But basically we are just comparing and looking at a particular small window in human development, right? And there's nothing natural or biological about it, right? That's why I say I don't believe in race. I think
you don't think there's an instinct
it's racialization. It is cultural. It is social. It's about language, right? It is. I don't think there's anything natural about when it comes to, if you think about it, it's about the sexual attraction, right? That produces offspring, right? That's how. So when you think about sexuality and you look at sexuality, it is not the case, and I can say that from my own individual experience, that I feel more attracted to people of my own race.
Completely,
right?
I understand.
But the interesting thing now, check this out. I spent a year, I grew up in Germany. I was always interested in German, quote unquote, people for my sort of heterosexual desires, right? I projected that. I went to India, right? It's quite personal, right? I went to India and I wasn't attracted at all to Indian women. 3 months in, I was like, whoa, she's hot. Oh my God, right? Same thing in in Hong Kong. I went to Hong Kong, lived in Hong Kong for 3 years. At the beginning, I wasn't interested, like sexually, in terms of my sexual gaze, heterosexual gaze. I wasn't interested in local Asian women. After 3 or 4 months, I began to, see find people attractive. But I think for me, it was really finding the beauty in the opposite sex, which in terms of evolutionary terms, this is sort of the natural drive, right? That puts man and woman together and makes babies, right?
Okay.
Makes genes.
Right.
Right?
I agree with this. I think this is I think this explains things fine and perfect, but I think where the actual instinct may come in is not within the seeking a sexual mate or etc., but is the conflict. Because, like I say, there have been things that have proven, or at least people claim to have proven, that there is that automatic within a fight that people automatically go unknowingly to the same people from the same genetics. And there's got to be something within the instinct of it. Surely there's got to, because we've got instinct all over us. I've tried to break boundaries on talking about this stuff, probably at my own risk many times, for my own risk of causing trouble or being misunderstood, because my intentions are good. But I've worked in hotels. And one of the things you notice in hotels is when groups stay together, they're nearly always the same colour.
Right.
They're nearly always the same background. They're nearly always the same race.
There's nothing.
They all seem very comfortable with that, and they seem very uncomfortable when of all races. I'm not saying there's one white, black, Asian, Indian. Anybody you want to put down there will all prefer to be around. Is that just cultural, or do you don't think there's any instinct?
I don't think there's anything there's something socially instinctive about it, in the sense that in that group, the question "where are you from" is not loaded, right? So you speak in that group together. You're all black or mixed race, or you're all white, or you're all male. Right, that's even like stronger.
Yeah. But this is what I mean within the conflict. This is what I mean less within the mating. I think it's more man. It's something that men share once crisis point hits. There's something inside us that innately turns back to the past, and we know that fundamental fear, anger, the want to defend is a very primordial instinct inside us. Now, there's things that have obviously must have developed over the time to make sure that you side with the right people. There must be some form of chemical something. There must be something.
I think it's just like learned trust, right?
Okay.
I think that would be my position. I take a very anti-biological position here.
I like an anti-biological
position. In that. I mean, I believe in biology and everything, but I still think that any social behavior is fundamentally socially learned. There's we human beings, after education and socialization, there's nothing instinctual about us apart from, of course, surviving, right? And now the interesting thing about surviving is, if you have trauma yourself or in your family, inherited trauma of genocide, for instance, right, of slavery, right, of persecution, then you are, with it, learning about that history, right, learning where you're from and what your ancestors went through, then at that point I think this mistrust against other races, put it bluntly, is something that is learned, right? That comes from that trauma, rather than, and it's now I feel like, I do. I mean, most of my friends, for instance, are white. I always grew up among white people mostly. Hardly any of my friends share that racialization that I had, or my close friends, right? But it feels really, really, really good if you speak to someone who can ask that question, "Where are you from?" and you know that it comes from a place, from a similar place, right? And it has a similar depth to it, rather than just a shallow piece of small talk, or in a racist intention, right? There's something nice to be in that safe space, right? Creating a safe space, and race and gender and sexuality and ability, and class as well. They are the divisions that are imposed on us by empires, by rulers, right? By social thinkers who thought they would create a new perfect society. So these things were imposed on us through education, through media, and now we are dealing with this. But these are just signifiers, right? These are just, go on another planet or whatever, they have a similar society. These will be different boundaries, right? It will be about the size of your feet, or I don't know. It will be about like if you're left-handed or right-handed. That will be the major.
This guy breathes mainly me,
right?
Oh,
so it doesn't almost doesn't matter what divisions we create. We have to deal with, if it is race or if it is gender or blah blah blah. These are imposed on us and they are arbitrary, right? And the signs that we use, like color of skin or genitals or who you love or who you have sex with, these are just signs that are completely arbitrary, but they have a purpose in our society, namely to divide and rule, right? And to make money.
I think the division is that's what I've seen in different ways all through my life. I know my family have history of division themselves. Some of my family were from Northern Ireland. Some of the history of my family, they were from Northern Ireland. They were in the Orange Order, which is a very heavily Protestant order. And they, of course, the history between... she's got something that makes noise. Take it away from her.
The history
of Northern Ireland is pretty heavy. Well, they took that with them when they left Northern Ireland. My great granddad Lewis Vedmore, he was born in Cannock, which is near Wolverhampton, just north of Birmingham. But they had come from Northern Ireland, Orange Order, and then they moved back down to Wales because I think most of the family lived down here. But they brought that with them. They always, however loving like members of my family were, I think they always kept that feeling of that deep disdain for the other, and in that case it was Protestants and Catholics. And you are right, divide and conquer is the reason why we have most of this, and the main division I think is the important one to concentrate on for most people, is rich and poor, because that's really, in a capitalist society, the only way we can make real change. And it's
quantification, money,
the ones at the top who have the power are using that power in that Roman way to divide and conquer. So that's the source of the problem as well at the moment. As soon as we get rid of the source of one problem, there's always going to be power-hungry, power-mad people. When you get down onto the ground and you stand in between a bunch of Asian people arguing with a bunch of white people in the middle of Bradford, and you tell them that they don't need to do all of that, is that part? How do we reach these people? How do we say, look, you're being divided on purpose, so geezer over here can take without causing is there a way to do that? Is there a way to do that?
The podcast, but it's just like we need to be aware that whatever we produce as cultural media producers, like yourself, like myself, that when we put our voice out there, it doesn't really matter if we have 20,000 subscribers or 220 or 7, right? That doesn't really matter. One is not better than the other. But whenever we put our voices out there, we need to be talking that talk that we are talking here, right? Mm-hmm. We need to be honest, we need to be reflective, and we need to fight for social justice. And in every word we say, that needs to be represented. So whoever listens to this, right, even if you only have 7 subscribers, right, amongst those 7, maybe someone will go on a trajectory and do their own research and start thinking and becoming conscious of themselves. I wrote a book, 300 pages. No one's going to read that entire thing. But if someone in 20 years or in 100 years picks that book up from a university library somewhere in, let's say, Kazakhstan, and says, oh, what's this pink book? Jaspal Naveel Singh, Transcultural Voices. Let me pick that out. And reads 2 pages and finds something that they can resonate with, that puts them on that, gives them confidence to fight for social justice and make their own experiences heard, then we have achieved it, right? We can't really hope for everyone to want to become conscious of these things, right? People, they have different souls. They're here for different purposes on this earth, right? Knowledge seekers like you and me, we might complain, right? Why doesn't everyone know? Politicians or rulers might complain, like, why doesn't everyone, abide by my laws or something, right? But then there's also a lot of people who, they just want to look at the sunset and chill. They just want to breathe. I'm doing a lot of yoga. I met a lot of people who's just breathing. It's just all I do in my life. My sister always says, all I want to do in my life is sleep. I want to sleep as much as possible. That's the highest goal of my life. Ooh. Right? That's
and
my sister.
Who's this?
My sister.
Is she married?
She's in a long-term relationship.
Man, that's all I want to do as well. I'm not going to say out loud, but basically sleeping, that's the best thing in the world.
So that needs to be acknowledged as well, and that needs to be seen as a valid form of life. Not everyone can sort of fight against injustices or talk against injustices. We do that. That is great. If we can reach 1 or 2 people, then our job is done in this world. We have not forgotten it. We have continued the struggle of freedom fighters since thousands of years, right? We are continuing this, of people who speak out against injustice, like Jesus, like Socrates, like Guru Nanak, right? Like Luther, right? Like Martin Luther King, like all these people, right? They were like Marx. They were speaking about some important stuff. They were pointing out the injustice, and we are continuing that. So that already is amazing that we are doing this, and we can maybe reach 1 or 2 people, and I don't think we can hope for much more.
I like to hope that something will click. That something will click, and I do feel that there's ways of describing everything to everybody. But it seems to be ways of describing everything to everybody on an individual scale. If we could find that one thing to just make people open up their eyes without causing pain or harm onto the rest of the world, that's the key. Looking for the thing that can help.
The activism is, I think, that we always have this idea of activism as leading to a goal, right? The suffragettes or whatever, they went out on the street to have that goal, representation in votes in elections, right? The civil rights movement, they went on the street to get civil rights, right? And that is amazing. I have full support for all these social movements. But activism to me is also just perpetuating the knowledge and keeping that, maintaining it, and that's an everyday struggle.
People tend to
individual.
Idolize.
You need to sit down with 7 billion people, one-on-one, right? That is what you need to do to make a change. And obviously that is not possible. So every interaction you have with the people in the park, walking the dog, with the shopkeeper, or online, you need to spread this message. You need to work with each individual on an individual basis, rather than thinking you can change things on a sort of with one what did you say, click, right? Or something like one click, one button, and that will change society. And that's what the socialists did, the communists did in the Soviet Union. Great idea, and fucked it up proper, right? So that is the problem, right? In thinking about social change from the top, or sort of with some sort of trick. It's not a trick. It is hard work every day.
I don't think it necessarily, because I was thinking that one sentence, that one carefully constructed piece of proposition that could possibly make people, a large amount of people, think very quickly. You know, there's so many quotes from throughout history and so many different things that give us massive bits of advice that sometimes are very hard to understand without a lot of talking behind it. You know, the truth of it. But I mean,
that's the hashtag nowadays, right? Me Too, BLM, right? These kinds of hashtags have that sort of what you talk about, like whatever Jesus said, love thy neighbor, or something that had a big impact. Or Luther said this, or Martin Luther King said, "I have a dream," right? And so these phrases in history play a big role. And I think nowadays it's interesting to think about certain hashtags as fulfilling this role.
Do you think there's there is a lot of hijacking? I mean, we are aware that it is a narcissist heaven. The internet at times, it's like a perfect place to go to try and look like the best, wonderful, most virtuous person in the world. But there's also like big companies and big powerful people at the top of these organizations choosing who's in charge of them now, and you know, there's always some form of controversy that comes from it. The dangers of having a hashtag and it being not just an ideological thing but an actual structure where with an organization, is there a difference there? Are we going too far with that?
Well, I mean, that's just, I guess, the nature of things. When you put your voice out there in without any microphones on, or not on the keyboard, but just speaking to one person, then, you know, you have one listener and one person you're responsible for, right? And one one interaction that you need to take responsibility for. Whereas when you record something on the microphone and put it out there, when you write a book or when you write something on the internet or a hashtag or whatever, then all of a sudden your circulation becomes so much more, right? Again, quantification, and it lands, or it arrives in sort of unexpected places, right? Interpreted in a decontextualized way by millions of people potentially. And at that point, you're almost, you know, you can't take so much responsibility for that. So defund the police, I think, is a good slogan, right? That went around, you know. And then I think Obama said in an interview or something. So there was a Black Lives Matter movement, post George Floyd, that moment where they said, okay, the police is actually not actually protecting us, but they are killing us.
Yeah.
So what we need to campaign for is to defund the police, right? To basically abandon the police at one point. And Obama said in an interview, I think, well, I have all sympathy with these Black Lives Matter protesters, but how are you going to sell this slogan, defund to the police, to Michelle's, that's his wife's, mother, who is afraid, like, to walk in the dark, and who needs the police and who trusts in the police to protect her. And I was like, wow, right? And of course, as a sort of former president, he needs to, like, sort of take this position in some ways, right? But I think it puts responsibility onto the person or the group that articulates defund the police in a way that it's like taking away the intention of it, right? It is defunding the police is a slogan. It is something that puts a counter narrative to the dominant narrative. Yes, policing is normal and needed, right? It creates a counterpoint. And society, of course, in some ways society that works with compromise needs to find itself somewhere in the gray middle, which is, of course, always a not so good solution. But so we need some policing, but not a lot of policing. Like, it's just like a weird position to be in. But that is the purpose, I think, of certain statements like defund the police, or all cops are bastards. And then people say, oh, not all cops. That's not the point, right? I mean, we're trying to make a point here, right? It's sort of, as soon as something circulates so widely, it it is prone to get misinterpreted because it's out of context.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, you can literalize. You may take anything literally or anything, however you choose nowadays, as long as it ends up with you being able to say, "Oh God, it's also terrible, and I'm also wonderful." Oh, look at how terrible you are. Oh, just that. I mean, they. So I think when we talk about the police, it's a very difficult subject, because the police nowadays, how we see them and their modern history, when they were developed, the original police force was, of course, Robert Peel's police force, and he was the person who also invented the Conservative Party in the UK. So they've got a lot of history, and most of it is about keeping people in control, under control, rather than actually sorting out the problems and sorting out the law. So I feel that a lot of the argument against the police is something that, I mean, it's so difficult. It's so difficult for the police to come out looking on top, because they do so much bad stuff. There's so much corruption. They allow themselves to be free from any type of real accountability and responsibility for their actions. And while that continues, it will continue. I mean, we'll continue to see all of the things that we've seen, like in Derek Chauvin and stuff. We're only going to see more of it. We've seen it in Cardiff as well. Cardiff has a history of really corrupt police forces, and I think that all of these hashtags about the police and responding to the police is possibly one of the most joining things that we all have in common, no matter our ethnicity or our race. We have to remember that there's authoritarians in certain positions who will try and take more power as much as they possibly can, and that will, of course, have an effect. Listen, all of this is, I mean, it will take me probably days to mentally digest some of this, so that's really good. I want to go back to that one question. Right. No, but I'm going to ask you, you know what base I'm asking. Where are you from?
So it's good that we sorted that out and gave it some context. So that is a big question, man. Where am I from?
I love it.
Like, I'm just from One Maitland Park. That's where I am, right? That's where I am from, in some ways. I was in other places in my life. I spent a few years in Hong Kong. I spent some time in India. I traveled a lot. And I was born in Germany, in Frankfurt, close to Frankfurt, Germany. And I lived in Germany most of my life. I got socialized in Germany. I did all my schooling in Germany. I learned the German language natively. The interesting thing is that, of course, the question, where are you from, requires, and I've noticed this in all my responses to this question, it requires a national identification, almost a flag that you carry on a national flag of your country that you carry on your chest or something. It became very pronounced to me in India, as I was traveling a lot in India, and I met random people on the train. We sat next to each other, and all of a sudden they ask, which country? That is the first thing that comes out of their mouth. Which country? And I found it really odd, the way they asked this question. Which country, right? So it is sort of as if the world was divided only by countries, right? I found it awkward, right? And I tried to come up with confusing, subversive answers. I said things like, oh, I'm from Frankfurt, rather than I'm from Germany. And they were like, oh, I like Bayern Munich. And I was like, oh, I like Mercedes-Benz, right? And so I was like, okay, what goes on in their head right now? Okay, they hear Frankfurt, the city. They know that Frankfurt is in the entity called Germany. What else do I know about Germany? BMW, Bayern Munich, or beer, or whatever it is, right? Immediately you create sort of a national coherence, a national essence, right, of this guy is German, right? I've nationalized you, right? Whereas the complex thing is, in Germany, I get asked the same question, and the answer they want over there is not Germany, right? It is India, or it is whatever else I say, right? Some people say I'm from Brazil, I look like Brazilian, or Arab or Moroccan. I got everything, right? Persian, everything. Spanish, Italian, Turkish, right? So wherever I go, like I get racialized in different ways. In India, I never get recognized as Indian. I say, oh, and they say, oh, what's your name? Jaspal Singh. I say, you are Jaspal Singh? Impossible, because it's such a prototypical Indian name. It's John Smith of India, right? so all of a sudden, this guy that they see as not Indian, as maybe Persian or Afghani or whatever, right? American, you know. They think everything first before I even got Japanese. Someone said Japanese. I nodded my head. I said, "Oh, my friend is from Japan." So he believed that Japan is more likely than India, which is insane because in Germany, you know. So the question, I guess, coming back to that question, it always allows me to tell my narrative, to tell my story in a appropriate way, appropriate to the context. Sometimes I just can't be bothered and say I'm from Germany. Sometimes I can't be bothered and say I'm from India. Sometimes I can't say I'm from the UK. Sometimes I subvert and say I'm from Frankfurt, or I'm from the world, or I'm from Europe, right? Or like whatever else I can, or I'm from hip hop. I'm from my mother. I'm from, right? So whatever it is. So whatever it is, I can tell my story. Each time I get asked this question, I can tell my story in a new way. And I would urge everyone who has a problem with this question, or who feels offended or disturbed by the question, to, use it, still be offended, still be annoyed, but use it as a possibility to tell your story in different ways. Don't give in to the essentialization and say, oh, I am black, therefore I am not from here, or I am woman, therefore I am this or that, or I'm mixed race and therefore I don't belong, or something. Refuse that narrative and subvert it and retell your narrative, because at the end of the day, it is not about your genetics. At the end of the day, it is how you tell yourself into society, how you narrate yourself into this life. It is not about who you are, but it is who you talk you are, right?
Who you choose to be, literally.
Choose to be, but that is where language comes in, right? That is where the narrative comes in.
Literally.
We tell stories of ourselves, and I noticed this when I came to the UK 10 years ago, and I had no friends over here, right? I spoke in a different language. No one knew anything of my backstory. Mm-hmm. I could say whatever I wanted to say. Yeah. I was like, wow, I can re-narrate myself. I can, certain things that I don't like about myself, I can just not do them again. Like something like homophobia. Like in my everyday language when I was growing up, we were using homophobic language all the time. Faggot, gay, the German words for that. In a sort of nonchalant, easy-going way. Like I didn't have a problem with homosexuals, but I was just using this language. Something I don't want to do anymore. This change in mobility coming here to the UK, to Cardiff, I said, well, actually, I don't need to be this homophobic person anymore. I can just change the language. I can just not say it, or be more reflexive around these things. Work on that, right? Work on my narrative, rather than being always typecast, labeled into this identity that you kind of lose control of. You tell yourself. You are not yourself. You are not yourself. You tell yourself, right? You narrate yourself. And that is, I think, a fundamental insight into my life and into my experiences.
Well, I think into understanding how to be a successful human who's able to look around and understand what's going on around as well, because you have to know, you have to come to some sort of conclusion yourself on who you are before other people can. Because I spent a lot of time, like lots of people do, thinking that I was an adult in my 20s and discovering I knew nothing and that I didn't know even who I was, and you're trying to learn how to narrate yourself through all of that time anyway. So it's a fantastic skill to just actually say, oh, these are the things about me that are important, that make me me. And you can, cut. So this is, I think there's rot in every language, in every culture that can be cut away.
You can cut it away, right? So the thing is, there is no culture, there is no language. The English language, doesn't exist. The Chinese language doesn't exist. It's not something that exists like a tree or like a dog, right?
Hey, Bella,
You
talking
exist,
to dog.
right? But the language doesn't exist. Show me what is language? Language happens in the moment between you and me.
Mm-hmm.
Language happens in the moment when you read the print on a page. That's when language happens. So take that out and language is gone.
Yeah.
Right? So that gives us ultimate agency over language.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we are actually languaging. There is no language. We are languaging all the time.
Yeah.
Right? We are creating, and then we start thinking that this thing is real. There is no English language. The English language lives amongst us.
It's literally
right?
going as we only create it as we go.
Even to call it is wrong in some way. Even to give it a name, English, or give it a name, the language is wrong. So in some ways that is a really hopeful message, because we can really tell ourselves into this world using the language that we choose to use. Mm-hmm. Not in the sense of English or Welsh or Hindi or German, but in the sense of what we say, right? And how reflexively we use language. Yep. That is what is important, right?
Let me tell you just a little something, Paddy, which I think is appropriate here as well. Is that I get asked a lot, where am I from my years of working in hotels, where I worked on front desks, and people would come up, and while I'm checking them in, because I've been all around the place, and I often talk in different accents because I'm a bit of a comedian in my own life, not an actual trying to be a comedian, but just I do. Often people don't recognise me as being Welsh straight away. They definitely don't recognise me as being from Cardiff. And though I'm working, say, in Cardiff in a hotel, I get asked nearly every time, where am I from? As though I'm not from Cardiff, because I'm in a hotel. They're in a transient state, and I always say, guess. And I leave them go through everything until I eventually tell them that, do you want to know where I'm from? And tell them I'm from Cardiff. And I let them do their own circle, go through their own little, in the same way that we can create a narrative. You can literally say, okay, you want to ask a question, I'll respond with a question,
right,
but a question that will make you think about the question more at the end of it, and will lead you to your own conclusion that you didn't know at the start, and you should have just probably, to an extent, we should assume we are from where we are. Where we are at that time, and like language, we only exist we have legs, we can walk, and we can move about, so we exist in that same way as language. Pally, it's been a pleasure to speak. As you can hear, there is a little puppy who's saying, no, I'm sure my friends are out in the park and I want to see them. Can you tell people about your book, a little bit about your book?
Right, so I published my first monograph. I brought it along. It has a beautiful pink cover, and it's called Transcultural Voices, Narrating Hip Hop Culture in Complex Delhi. And it is an ethnography, a one-year fieldwork based research among young, mostly men, mostly migrant men, working class, who in Delhi, who live in all kinds of communities in Delhi, in India, the capital of India, and have, practiced hip hop in all its manifestations, mainly b-boying and b-girling. So most of these people all of them are dancers or closely affiliated to dancing crews. Many of them are graffiti writers and musicians, and only a very few are rappers. Now that piece of research was done in 2013. Now that picture has changed a lot in India and Delhi, the hip hop scene. They have a lot of rappers and a lot of rap music now. But back in that moment in time in 2013 in Delhi, rap music, one of the elements of hip hop, was sort of an underrepresented element of hip hop. And in this book, I focus much more on the dancers and on the graffiti writers who formed that initial phase of hip hop culture in Delhi, which sort of started in around 2006 2008 to become a visible scene. But there was hip hop cultural production in India since the 80s. But in around 2007, 2008, with the emergence of YouTube, with the emergence of the internet, with the emergence of 3G, 4G networks and smartphones and so on, there was really a sort of an upsurge of hip-hop cultural production in India, and I'm documenting this in this book a bit from a linguistic perspective. So yeah, check it out. It is published with a Bristol-based publisher,
Nice.
Multilingual Matters. They're really, really great. I love them. They have like a very amazing family vibe going on in their little company. Multilingual Matters is the publisher. Very proud to be part of their catalog. And yeah, Transcultural Voices, Narrating Hip Hop Culture in Complex Delhi. My name is Jaspal Naveel Singh, and do get in touch with me anytime if you want to know more. Sit down with me.
How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can email me. I can give you the email address. You can put it on your thing, right? Yeah, get in touch with me, and like if you have any ideas about this, want to chat about something, or have other interesting things that I want to talk about, or want to critique me, then do get in touch.
I definitely gonna wanna talk on the record one more time for sure. That would be about hip hop in general,
Nice.
and how hip hop relates to culture, because I've been into hip hop since the first days of my journey into music.
Right.
I mean, I was kind of lucky enough. My dad wanted to watch a very famous German show when I was young. A show called Tutti Frutti.
Oh yeah,
everybody knows Tutti Frutti, where everybody would get topless and dance around the place. And my dad got Sky Television for that reason.
Right.
When I was 10, 11 years old, it was just like really the early days. And Yo MTV Raps was just. I had two older sisters. They both got into rap instantly. All of their CD collection became my CD collection. All my friends were into rap. It's like such a fantastic way to understand culture and diversity within culture, and the oppression and everything else that goes on top, and systems. I mean, it's so beautiful, and it's such a fantastic art. So definitely want to speak to you about that again, because
let's do it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on.
Thank you.
And excellent. I hope you enjoyed that all, and we'll speak soon.